It is live cooking demo Tuesday. I am Jen. I am the registered dietitian and chef behind Chef Girl Nutrition, and I go live on the Chef Girl Nutrition Facebook page every Tuesday at 4:30 Mountain Time, 6:30 Eastern Time, and every other time in between there. And I'm always here with either a cooking demo to kind of show you a healthy cooking technique, how to use an ingredient that's in season, really anything in the any sort of cooking demo that you ask for. So either here with a cooking demo or kind of talking about some sort of hot topic in nutrition, debunking some nutrition myths, anything that I can do to help support you on your healthy eating journey. We're making sweet potato fries. But I'm actually going to show you a few different ways that you can cut up your sweet potatoes to cook them in the oven. So we're not actually frying these, but we can make them in the shape of French fries, but we're not frying these, we're roasting them in the oven. But I'm going to show you a few different ways that you can cut them up. So one way will be cutting them into fries, but then I'll show you a couple of other ways too, because depending on the way that you cut them, they'll give you a different texture, and that can be totally to your preference. And it's also a way to get some variety, right? So variety doesn't just have to be that you're eating, actual different foods. Variety can also be in the sense of changing up the types of, the ways that you're enjoying your favorite foods to keep things exciting, right? So that it doesn't get boring. So if, sweet potatoes are kind of a staple in your diet already, but maybe you mostly eat them, just like a baked whole sweet potato, right? A baked potato, a baked sweet potato in the oven. So maybe this will be a different way for you to enjoy them, right? So it doesn't always have to be, it can just be as simple as changing up the way that you prepare some of your favorite ingredients to add some variety and keep things exciting. And so these sweet potatoes are super meal preppable, right? So you can totally make them in advance. So on that topic of meal planning and prepping a little bit ahead, if you prep a big batch of roasted sweet potatoes, this goes for really roasting a big batch of any veggies, then you have them on hand to add into tons of different dishes throughout the week, right? So if you have, you don't have to just make enough sweet potatoes for one dinner, make more, and then you can enjoy them in different lunches throughout the week. Maybe you have, a breakfast of eggs and sweet potatoes or something like that, right? There's so many different ways that you can enjoy them, and it's something that holds up really well and reheats well, so it's a great preppable dish to make. So let's dive into it. If you are making these, you want to have your oven turned on to 425 degrees. So we're using a high heat here for roasting. Always want to, when I'm thinking of roasting, it's usually in the 400 to 425, maybe 450 range, because when we're roasting veggies, we want them to get that nice caramelization, right? They get a little bit crispy, they get browned, and that's what makes the texture of roasting veggies so delicious. So that's what we want here. So the oven is at a nice high heat of 425. So the first thing that I want to mention is if you are wanting to cut your sweet potatoes into fries, you want to try and choose sweet potatoes that are long like this versus kind of short and stumpy like this, right? Not to discriminate on size for the sweet potatoes, but the long ones, as you can tell, right, you're going to be able to get that long fry shape much easier than a sweet potato that's kind of short and stumpy. The short and stumpy ones are really great for cutting the sweet potatoes into cubes or chunks, right? So I'm going to show you both ways. So let's take the long sweet potato. Now, I don't peel my sweet potatoes when I try not to peel. Let me pull this up again. I try not to peel if it works in the dish, if it works for what I'm making, because the peel of fruits and vegetables has a ton of extra nutrients and a lot of extra fiber. So if the skin or the peel is edible, I prefer to keep it on so that I get those added nutrients in. So I'm not going to peel these. You can peel them if you don't like the skin, if you don't like the texture of it. But I just rinse these really well, scrub them down, right? They are pretty dirty, so you want to definitely scrub them, get that dirt off, but you do not need to peel them. So I'm not peeling these. So let's get to the chopping. So I start just by cutting off those very ends. And then we're talking about the sweet potato fries here. So that's what I'm going to show you first. Now, I also want to point out different ways to cut the sweet potatoes because I'm a big proponent of finding ways to handle larger, especially larger fruits and veggies when you're cutting them. Finding a way to cut them that feels comfortable for you, right? That doesn't make you feel like you're going to cut yourself, right? That the knife is going to slip. You want to feel really comfortable when you're handling these. So even though in culinary school, right, you might learn a specific kind of cutting technique, when it comes to home cooking, the best way to cut something is the way that you feel comfortable doing so. So what I'm going to do with these is actually cut off, and so you can see I'm really grasping on here, right? This is definitely unstable because it's round, so you want to really be holding this tight. Make sure you're using a nice sharp knife, and I'm just going to keep cutting these planks across about 1/2 inch thick or so. All right, so I'm just getting these nice planks. And then what we would do to get fries from this is just cut them across, right? So this is a way to really get that nice French fry shape. Right? So that's how we can get a really nice French fry shape for our sweet potatoes. And of course, this would go for making regular potato fries also from regular white potatoes. So we can do that with this piece too. Okay, so that's how we get those long, French fry looking kinds of cuts. Okay, let's set those aside. Now with that same potato, imagine that I just cut off that one side, right? And then that gave me now a flat surface to sit it on, so it's much easier to handle. So that's another thing that you can do is just cut off that, take that one slice, that end slice, and then sit the sweet potato down so that it's nice and flat. And then you can just kind of cut it into, like you can cut this in half, right? And just keep kind of cutting it down into smaller chunks. And it can help, when you're cutting through something hard like this, it can definitely help to keep your hand on top of the knife. Okay, and then once you have a wedge like this, now what you can do is cut that into more French fry looking shapes. All right, and then depending on, you can really play around with it. Cut these in half again to make them a little bit thinner. If you don't want it so long, right, maybe you cut them like that and have some fun little diagonal looking French fries. So that's the thing about making things yourself, right, is that you can get creative and, like I said, cut in the way that feels comfortable for you. So again, I just cut this wedge into smaller wedges. Okay, and then we can cut that in half, cut this guy in half, and there we go. So all different kinds of sizes, right? The thing is that when you are doing this, you want to try and keep them of an equal size so that they all cook evenly. So I'm just showing you some different ways, but if you're doing this at home and cooking them all together, you want to try to keep them at the same size so that they all cook evenly. So let's finish. You know what? I'm going to pull another sweet potato in now to show you another way. So again, just slicing off those ends. And then if you're really not comfortable cutting the potato the long way, right? Like this one is like really kind of wobbly. So if I'm like, you can see, right? If I'm just like this, like it's not sitting flat. So that's a risk for the knife to slip. So you see how this is like a pinch hold, okay? So you're holding it over the knife on both sides to keep it really stable. So that's something that can help to cut it in half right away. If you're really not feeling comfortable with that, it can be a lot easier to cut it crosswise, right? To cut it the short way. And that's what I'll show you with that other potato. So let's do this. Right, so you get that knife through by putting your hands on the top. You have to be careful because the knife can it's kind of like similar to cutting through a spaghetti squash, right, where the knife can kind of get a little bit stuck. So you really do want to be careful and make sure that you have a good grasp. But so you can start it out this way and just slice it in half from the get. And then just keep cutting across and slicing these into smaller and smaller wedges. And this is also, if you didn't want to cut them into French fry shapes, you could just leave them as bigger wedges too, right? Making note that, of course, something like this is going to cook faster than something like this. So that's the only thing to kind of pay attention to, right? But it's totally up to you how you want to enjoy your sweet potatoes. So if you want to keep cutting these into French fry shapes, then we can just keep cutting these smaller and smaller, right? And now these are more like French fries. And that's really that for getting the French fry shape. Okay. Then the other option, using our shorter and stumpier sweet potato, again, cut off those ends, is to cut crosswise, like I said, right? So I'm gonna hold it really nice and tight at one side, get the knife in like halfway, then put my hands on the top of the knife to help me bring the knife through. Okay, so then you end up with two halves like this, so they're much smaller to work with. And this kind of potato is really great for making like cubes, right? Like diced cubes for roasting your sweet potatoes. So you can cut that in half, right? Always putting it back on a flat side. Cut that in half. Cut these in half, right? And just keep cutting them until they're at the size that you want them to be. This is kind of the size that I like for roasting sweet potato cubes. But it's totally up to you, right? So it's just about finding what feels comfortable for you, deciding how you're enjoying them, right? Do you want them to be French fry shape? Do you want them to be cube shape? And that's it. So I wanted to show you a few different ways that you can kind of go about handling the sweet potato. Let's talk about how we're going to cook them. So I already mentioned that the oven is at 425 degrees, right? That nice high temperature to get a nice caramelization on these. I'm going to just move my cutting board and grab a bowl. So for roasting any veggies, right, we're gonna toss them in oil with salt and pepper, whatever other seasonings we're using. So I like to toss them in a separate bowl and then put them on a baking sheet because I just find that that helps for all of the pieces to get really nicely, evenly coated. But if you want to skip an extra bowl to clean, you can also just kind of toss it all together on the baking sheet and then spread them out. But I'm going to do it in a separate bowl here, also just to be able to show you. So I'm going to just do the ones that I cut into fry shape. So I'm adding all of those into my bowl. And then I'm going to use avocado oil. So like I said, this is a hot oven, right? It's at 425. So you want to be careful that you're using an oil that has a higher smoke point so the oil doesn't burn. That's when you'll see, you know, like the where you'll get kind of like black speckles on the baking sheet if the oil is burning, right? So we don't want our oil to burn. And it can create a lot of smoke, right? If you open the oven, that can create a lot of smoke. So we want to avoid that. So something like avocado oil is a nice neutral flavored oil that's also high heat. You could also use safflower oil, olive oil that's not extra virgin olive oil is better for something like this. Organic canola oil is great. So any sort of like neutral flavored high heat oil is great. So I'll be honest, when I'm roasting veggies, I don't measure the oil and the salt and the pepper. It's just, you know, get them nicely coated. We're gonna add a nice pinch of salt, a nice pinch of pepper. But it's about, you know, for the sweet potatoes I have in here, I'll add about a tablespoon, but I just kind of swirl it around a couple times, get a nice coating on them. And then I'm gonna add a nice pinch of salt to these. We want them to be nicely seasoned. Then we're gonna add a nice pinch of pepper. The more that you are in the kitchen doing these things yourself, the more that you just kind of learn to eyeball it, right? You just kind of learn to know what the right amount is. You know, you can always err on the side of caution and start with less so that you don't, you know, over season something and then it doesn't taste really great. So if you're not sure, you want to err on the side of caution when you're kind of taking your own liberties with something. Always, you know, start with a little bit less. And, you know, with something like roasted veggies, that's kind of a different story because you're not tasting it as you go. But in general with cooking, that's why you always want to be tasting dishes as you're cooking, right? And get used to detecting if something needs more seasoning, right? Does it need more salt? Does it need more of a zing from vinegar or lemon juice or something like that? So that's a whole other conversation and I'm on a tangent now. But my secret ingredient for these sweet potato fries is garlic powder. So garlic powder is probably just a staple spice that you have in your spice cabinet, and it just like takes these to another level. So again, I don't measure these and I add a lot. So I just I pour it on until the sweet potatoes are really, really nicely coated. Okay, so you saw how many shakes I added there. So that's my secret, my super special secret ingredient. It's not so secret. It's nothing unusual. It's just garlic powder. But it really does add a really nice flavor to the sweet potatoes. It almost it gives them this kind of like crispier crust as they cook. So I definitely recommend trying that out. But on that note, when it comes to roasting veggies, making the sweet potato fries, it's a great opportunity to get creative and to add your favorite spices, right? Add your favorite flavors. So there's tons of spices that could go really well with these, right? You could add smoked paprika, you could add cumin, you know, depending on what kind of dish you're eating them with, you can season it to kind of complement that. So, you know, always kind of keeping that base of salt and pepper and then adding on whatever other spices make sense for what you're cooking. And also to that point, if you are prepping these ahead of time, you can keep them just like, you know, neutrally seasoned with just the salt and pepper and cook them all that way. And then as you're using them throughout the week in different dishes, you can then season them with something else when you go to reheat them, right? So I would recommend reheating these in the oven so that they get crispy again, right? If you reheat them in the microwave, they won't retain that crisp. They'll get a little bit softer. So if you go to reheat them in the oven, just give them another quick toss with another spice that you want to add, right? Maybe you're, one night you're eating them on the side of something like black bean burgers and you want to make them like smoky and add smoked paprika and some cumin to them. Maybe you're having them on the side of a more Mediterranean dish and you want to add some dried oregano or something like that. So you can always add a spice later on when you're going to enjoy them when you go to reheat them. So these are really nicely coated with everything. I'm just stirring them around with a spoon. All right, so this is what's going on in here. If you're going to add fresh herbs to your veggies, you want to choose ones like rosemary that are hearty, right? So something like rosemary can really hold up when it's cooking in the oven. You wouldn't want to add something soft like cilantro or basil or parsley because those will just burn in the oven. So a softer, more delicate fresh herb would be great to toss with your veggies once they come out of the oven. But if you wanted to add fresh herbs for the cooking process, something like fresh rosemary is great. So you can definitely add, that would be delicious with sweet potatoes. You could definitely add some fresh rosemary sprigs to the baking sheet. Don't be afraid to try something, try it out, and if you don't like it, then you know that you didn't really like that flavor. But that's really the way to kind of get to know your palate, get to know what flavors you like, and get more comfortable in the kitchen is just by trying things. All right, so I'm gonna push this down again to show you what's going on the baking sheet. So I have a large baking sheet lined with parchment paper. Get our sweet potatoes out there. And something that's really important, and I talk about this every time I'm roasting something here, is making sure that your veggies are not overlapping on the tray. And the reason for that is if they are overlapping, what happens is it just creates steam. The heat from the veggies just creates a ton of steam. So the veggies will get soft, but they won't get that crisp caramelization that we want. So you want to make sure that they're not overlapping and that there's plenty of room on the tray. And if there's not enough room, just use a second tray. Or cook them in batches if you don't have a second tray. So I'm just gonna lay these out. These are definitely a little unevenly cut because of how I was demoing them to you, but it'll be fine. But for the most part, you do want to try to cut them in even sized pieces so that they cook evenly. Okay, so it's just kind of like a little, what is that game? Tetris. It's a little like Tetris, trying to figure out how to get these all on the tray. There we go. All right. So that's it. So these are nice and ready to go into the oven. They're going in at 425. We're going to put them in for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to flip them. So let me put them in. Those are going to go in for 15 minutes to start. Then you want to take them out and flip them halfway through, and then put them back in for another 10 to 15 minutes. And again, remember, like I said, the cook time will depend on how you cut the potatoes. So just kind of keeping that, cook time in mind and making sure that you check up on them so that they don't get burnt. You do definitely want to take them out and toss them halfway through so that they get that caramelization on more than one side, right? And so they don't just get like super browned and potentially burnt on one side. You want to give them a nice toss. So that's it for this demo. So that's how you can make homemade sweet potato fries. You can see how it really is a simple process, right? It's really no different than roasting any other kind of vegetable. It's just, getting them cut into that French fry shape. But it's, it's really no different than how you would roast any veggie.